Albion by C.P. Webster. Book 1. Arthur. Part 1. The Quest. John Gabriel fled like a shadow out of London. The pale young man sat alone in the train compartment, his gaze fixed on the dirt-streaked window, his eyes flickering with both anticipated relief and fear. With a sigh, the locomotive finally shuddered forth, heaving the drab, screeching chain of rusted carriages in its wake. Dwarfed by towering smokestacks and the high looming weight of the windowless factory blocks, the train crawled slowly through the mouldering heart of the drear metropolis. In spasms of steam, choking smoke, and a forlorn shriek of the whistle, it sluggishly gathered a reluctant momentum. With listless jolts, it climbed upwards, rising at last to a high, soot-blackened brick viaduct, smothered in hanging clouds of smog. Then, as if suddenly eager to be gone, it jerked into speed, racing far above the miry streets, where crowds of hollow-eyed people shambled through the smoky gloom below. At last, even the seemingly endless rows of grim tenements and the maze of stinking alleys and polluted canals was overtaken. Though its reach seemed at first interminable, the outliers of the city gradually fell away, and the landscape began to empty. Soon neither house nor pilgrim nor labourer broke the wide grey desolation of the collective farms. Nevertheless, the dark city lingered like a pall in both Gabriel's vision and his thoughts. And the rain fell hard, drilling the windows of his carriage. It enveloped the train so completely that just for a moment he could see nothing beyond the streaming rivulets of water. His eyes closed then, and he thought of his world falling away. No more intrigue, no more hiding, no more fear. Now only the flight. His departure had been necessary, quiet and unannounced as he travelled with all speed to the north. As the rain subsided, Gabriel resumed his vigil, staring forlornly out of the window. Wraith-like trees snatched at the train as it careened along through the sheets of rain. The grey swell of earth stretched into beyond, carrying away the flotsam of copses, hedges, and newly green woods. On his lap was an old dog-eared book, closed and forgotten. And still he waited for a sign, mumbling distractedly an old song which came unexpectedly to his lips, bringing with it memories of hushed silences of childhood awe. Lead, kindly light, amid the encircling gloom. The night is dark and I am far from home. Keep thou my feet. I do not ask to see the distant scene. One step enough for me. His voice faltered as the compartment door suddenly opened. The guard was a dishevelled elderly man, whose threadbare uniform was shiny at the elbows and seat of his pants. He waited, muttering impatiently, as Gabriel fumbled in his coat pocket. When he finally held out his travel documents, Gabriel's eyes strayed to the shell-shaped tin badge on the old man's lapel that marked him as a worker pilgrim. In turn, the official stared at the youth, then unfolded the docket carefully. John Gabriel, scholar, he mumbled, reading the details on the papers aloud. Gabriel looked out of the window. The yellowed papers were forged, and he did not want his eyes to show it. Are you going far tonight, comrade? The man asked gruffly, still squinting at the open document in his hand. Gabriel shook his head. No, comrade, not far. He recited the lies. He continued to stare at the world rushing past outside. I'm going home to stay with my family over the summer. The scholarium has been closed. The man grunted and clipped the docket. Then you were lucky. My advice is go home and stay there. He handed the papers back and followed Gabriel's gaze out through the carriage window. It's dog's weather, all right, the man said, and sighing loudly he closed the compartment door after him. 2 hours later, the train finally started to slow. As the light gradually faded, the engine surrendered to the encroaching darkness. Gabriel's carriage groaned to a standstill by an empty platform, wreathed in steam, rain, and smoke. Heart fluttering now in sudden fear, he hefted up his pack, pulled his cap firmly over the tangle of his unruly fair hair, and tightened his mackintosh. Outside, the rain was now a heavy drizzle. Ahead, the track was blocked. This was the end of the line. Somewhere in the darkness, further along the closed tracks and perhaps only a few miles away, was the boundary, and beyond that lay the quarantine. That was where the blight had been worst in Albion. The only surviving communities in the north were the industrial coastal settlements, walled steam coal ports, linked only by the sea. These were too important to lose, and had been vigorously protected from the blight at great cost of life during the Troubles. The rest had been left to perish. Many empty leagues now lay between the boundary and the icy seas of the ultimate north. But Gabriel was determined to cross into the quarantine. He stepped onto the platform, and the tattered remains of an old news sheet blew into his path, halting momentarily by his booted feet. The grey mass of a protesting multitude stared up at him before it was tugged away. The photograph had reminded him of his old life, with the muddy footprint of a boot smeared across the formless, fuzzy faces in the picture. The platform was lit by a single dithering light, a smoky, dim yellow oil lantern, its viscous smoke beaten down by the heavy rain. A dark figure in an ill-fitting uniform stood huddled beneath its weak sphere, as if seeking warmth as well as shelter from the encroaching night. There was the smell of steam coal smoke, and faintly the frying aroma of grease-laden potatoes. Looking at the ground, Gabriel stepped past the shivering guard quickly, and out into the dark, quiet lane. There was a momentary feeling of panic as he heard the train reverse its direction and move steaming into the night behind him. A sudden descent of solitude stronger than anything he'd yet felt. Then he turned his face to the lane, and putting his head down again, walked on. The village was still in the darkness. Even the inn was subdued, the light and sounds from within muted by thick, heavy drapes. The muffled laughter, music, and conversations seemed to come from a very long way off, as if they had nothing to do with this world at all. Front doors were shut, and the dark windows of houses stared blindly at the passing walker. Soon he was by the lich gate of the church, then the mouldering slabs of weathered sandstone in the churchyard. The tower was a sombre mass against the rain, the ugly gargoyle faces dribbling water. But there was a vague light in the former church, and the distant grinding of a pipe organ as someone practised for Sunday's folk speak. After the old church he came to the rectory, and heard the tinny sound of a phonograph, a weakly merry tune that fell hollow against the dark evening air. Through the uncurtained window he saw a man and a woman dancing in a wooden embrace. Unsmiling they circled the room, then out of sight as Gabriel passed quickly by. He heard the cylinder stick. All the way up the lane and out of the village he was followed by that sound, repeating the same note again and again. 2 miles away he found a deep enough copse to creep and stumble into. He could go no further in the dark, and here, so close to the railway, the boundary would inevitably be watched. He needed shelter, and crawled beneath the low-spreading boughs of an old oak. At the base of the trunk he found a damp sandy haven to sleep in, and he slept with his raincoat wrapped around him, and his cap pulled over his eyes. The sounds of his uneasy slumber passed unnoticed in the breezy night air. Before he knew what he desired, the desire itself was gone.